Yeah, good morning. And I have, first of all, to admit that for me it's a pleasure to be one of the first to speak in this new building, because this building has a long story with lots of conflicts. It's a bit like the European Union in Lüneburg, so many tensions, and in the end, so it worked, and those who had a good idea, they made a dream so becoming true for Lüneburg. And since I'm from this region, my Heimat is northeast Lower Saxony, so I live 30 kilometers east from Lüneburg, in between the nuclear plants in Gorleben and Lüneburg. I'm at home. And to see this university in this region growing and developing, especially also based on some ideas like sustainability, so for me was, as a politician from this region, was quite a pleasure. And as I said, I was curious to see the auditorium, and I like it. Hope it will be a good place for you during the coming years. And it's my first time that I'm participating in the opening of this special week for the newcomers in Lüneburg. Last time that I joined was for the last day of this opening week, so I will see the differences also. How to start? So the title has already been mentioned. Yes, I'm convinced when we talk about Europe and the European Union and the future, it's about the question how to defend a miracle. Since the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom, me and my colleagues, we had to think a lot about what happened in the UK. And you know that, because I hope you are interested a bit already in European politics, you know that we learned after the vote a lot about the process of the vote. I can at this point already say I'm since long very doubtful on ideas of direct democracy, and that direct democracy is always better than representative democracy. I have a deep appreciation for representative democracy and so possibilities of checks and balances, especially as a German, because I think it's a good guarantee against extremist decisions. And so when I think back to the Brexit campaign, I will never forget that tons of lies were distributed to influence the vote. And for me, it was one of these experiences where you stand there and think how to regain truth if suddenly lies are prevailing and are really dominant in a very, very existential process of decision-making in a country like UK. And this is a country which has a relatively well-developed media sector, public broadcasting, media laws. But in spite of all this, in this process of direct democracy, a non-binding referendum, lies were dominant, and these lies, until today, they are known and understood by many, but they survive. And what we understood is that many people who voted in UK on the future of the European Union and their country, they had no understanding about the European Union of today. They had no understanding about the institutions. So people working as civil servants in the European Commission, me, a politician elected by citizens to the European Parliament, Commission's President, Monsieur Juncker, for many of the Brits, suddenly we all were cold-blooded technocrats. Yeah? And so those people, without any knowledge, had to vote on the future of their country and the future of the European Union on both sides. So on the Remain side and the Leave side was the same phenomenon. And this is really threatening that people who have no idea about what the European Union is are deciding on our future. It's a huge challenge, and it's not only a challenge for me, it's mainly a challenge for you. So for the next generations who want to live in security and peace and democratic systems on the European continent. What I found so alerting is that people in UK, and it's the same for many citizens in most of the other countries in the EU, they have no idea about the European Union, its institutions, its checks and balances, its relations, well-organized relations of power in between the national governments and Brussels, no ideas about the rules, and they have, in addition, forgotten about our common past and what made the decision possible to create the European Union, or in the very beginning, the European Community. I think it's really, again, about the idea that the past is the prologue of the future, what we have to discuss. So among my generation and your generation, if we want to defend a miracle. And this miracle is, according to my understanding, the European Union. Without understanding the past, it will be impossible to understand and accept that the European Union is far away from being perfect. How could the first supranational model of democracy among 28 nations, after a relatively short period of only 50, 60 years, many states are members of the European Union only since 15 years or since 12 years, to be exactly since 2004. How could this first process and model of supranational democracy be perfect after such a short time? How could it be perfect after the development of growth of the European Union, which brought together states which see democracy like Germany or many states in the West since long, compared to Poland, Hungary, Estonia, and other countries in the East who know democracy only since a bit more than 15 years. Not decades, but only a short period. So it cannot be perfect. And if you don't understand the reasons why it can't be perfect, so if you don't understand the history, you will not be able to deal with the problems and the daily problems we face in the European Union. And so to come back to the idea of the miracle and what you have to understand if you want to defend it. So I'm now, since around about 25 years, an elected politician for the Green Party. I started my political career in the Lower Saxonian Parliament, and so in the year 2004, I was elected to the European Parliament for the first time. And what I understand is, so more and more, that so also in politics, very, very seldomly you see miracles to happen. So it's really one of the most astonishing and most, I would say, so valuable experiences for citizens on the European Union, in the European Union, that only 5 years after one of the most awful wars in the history of this continent, after the Second World War, after Holocaust, after atrocities which are meanwhile very often forgotten. So we saw an election campaign in Germany in which one of the heads of the new nationalist party, AfD, campaigned to regain a better picture of the Wehrmacht, the German army in the Second World War. So atrocities which should not be forgotten. But you have to put this in context. The atrocities which destroyed Europe, mainly also because Germany went crazy in the first part of this century several times, yeah? And these atrocities should not be forgotten, but you have to put it into this context that only 5 years after the end of the Second World War, politicians decided that it would be the best answer to the risks and dangers of nationalism to work together, to overcome the borders of not only the national states, but also of the idea of that one nation is better than the other one, and that one nation has the right to define the destiny of another nation, and that it would be the best response against nationalism and against insecurity and war to work together, so that enemies, Germans made them our enemies, that they invited Germany to participate together with 5 other nations in the founding of the European community. This is, I would say, from a political perspective, and after I saw many compromises failing in my political life, I think this is one of the biggest miracles which could happen in the European Union, and this is I think the proof that good politicians can learn from mistakes and can learn also can learn lessons to make it better. So only 60 years after 6 countries decided to go for this union, we have to think about what we have achieved. And I know, as you said it when I entered, many people think the European Union is not sufficiently delivering, is not up to date when it comes to the big challenges like social crisis, the crisis of the common currency, financial crisis, refugee crisis, war in Ukraine, destabilization of the neighborhood also in Turkey. So think about your European life, European citizens' life, and I think most of you are from European countries and not from the outside. I have no good information about this, but think about this and look to your life from outside of the European Union. I have very often the opportunity to look to Germany and the European Union states from outside. I'm traveling a lot in the eastern neighborhood of the European Union. I travel a lot to Turkey in the recent years because of the negative development in Turkey. And I have developed a much better understanding of the values we are guaranteeing to the citizens of the European Union by leaving the European Union again and again and coming back to the European Union and facing what we have achieved. And the main achievements, and so this is in a way also negative because other people have not, other citizens of other regions have not the same experience. The main achievement is, from me, security, peace, and build on this, democracy and the rule of law, and that over a period of only 60 years, more and more citizens of the continent, which was completely destroyed, which ended after the atrocities of the Germans, also in the hands of dictators in the south of Europe and in the east of this continent, so that in spite of the Cold War, so only 60 years after the starting of the European community, we could sit on the table after 2004 with 28 nations from this continent negotiating instead of fighting, finding compromises, building consensus on most of the huge challenges on which I could easily say that none of those nation states would be able to give a good response, to find a good solution on its own and in isolation. And so what is my idea on my task and your possibilities, and hopefully also what you accept as your tasks? So I think politicians like myself, 60 years after the first decisions of the peaceful European integration process, the main task of my generation is now to keep together what we have achieved and also to regain the idea that part of the answer for the future we find in our past. So Europe is not the reason for nationalism, the right-wingers and in some countries like France, also extreme left parties are campaigning for. Europe, the European Union, is the answer against nationalism. It's to escape, it's made to escape the risks and the dangers which had their roots in nationalism on this continent again and again. And I hope that this period in which many people told me in many events I made on Europe during the last 2 years, that this period in which I have to listen to speeches saying, oh, keep away with your old stories from war and Holocaust, and the world is different right now. So the problem is history repeats itself, and we have not achieved the end of history as some advocated, but we have, as the European Union, we have achieved a quite good fundament for our citizens to develop a better future for those who are part of the European Union. And it's very much also related to our neighborhood. This I have to mention as one of the big challenges. Yeah, what's going on in Turkey, what's going on in North Africa, or what's going on in Russia is not something we have not to worry about. So our responsibility and that we take responsibility for our neighborhood is very much related to our own interest. So to guarantee peace and stability, if you are not taking responsibility anyhow for your neighborhood, is very difficult. So stability, democracy in our neighborhood matters a lot for the internal situation. And it's also something, so Poland will never be able, and the Baltics will never be able to escape themselves from a more imperialistic policies of the neighbor Russia alone. Poland needs the European Union. In the same time, I can tell you, the Germans, they will never, ever be able to solve the huge refugee crisis on their own. They will need in this also the other members of the European Union. And to be honest, we will not solve all the problems of what is meant when people say refugee crisis on the territory of the European Union. We will accept more refugees for different reasons. We will accept more migrants in the European Union in the decades to come. But the bulk of the problems, for example, when it comes to migration from Africa, the biggest problem we have to solve is the situation in Africa, and part of the answer of the refugee crisis has to be given by the European Union together, but in Africa and not in the European Union. And whatever you might think about my task, and so task of actual politicians in the European Union, what we are managing to do and what we are not managing to do. So when it comes, for example, to the issue on security and Russia, we managed to find a compromise which is not to go in a military trap, but to decide in favor of diplomatic solutions, the very, very complicated Minsk agreements, and we put pressure on this diplomacy by deciding on economic sanctions altogether in the European Union against Russia, because Russia was breaking very important laws, international laws, by annexation of Crimea and by supporting the war against Ukraine. This was, I think, one of the biggest challenges for the European Union, but the European Union stood and stands in this very, very challenging situation with Russia. Turkey is still ahead, for example, how to find a solution. I think for the Germans, and they made it a big issue in the electoral campaign. For the Germans, it's very important not to forget that it's not alone Germany to decide what is the new way of dealing with Turkey. It's a European issue, and whatever the Germans say in the end, so it will matter what the European Union takes as a strategy towards Turkey. And so only aggressive answers will not solve the problem, because so the situation internally in Turkey is for many people not at all what they want, and the European Union has not only to find a response to Erdogan, the European Union has also to find a response to protect at least half of the citizens of Turkey who are still very much in favor of bringing their country back to a democratic track. So it's quite complicated, as you see, to find again and again answers, but it's also not true that the European Union mainly fails. In the recent crisis, the European Union always stood together and found solutions, but mainly solutions which were made from compromise. And compromise is, I would say, part of the reality which always comes after the dream became true. So the miracle or the dream of the European Union became true, and what now is our task is to deal with reality. So it's not any longer about dreaming the European Union, it's about regaining again and again trust in the European Union and deciding how to develop it. I would say the actual generation, as a politician, I represent this generation who participated in the making and developing of the European Union over the last 1 or 2 decades. Our main task is right now to keep the things together, to regain trust of the citizens and to show and prove that we are able to do something. I'm not convinced that the mood to completely overcome the national state is the right mood for this period. I would say it's more about understanding, developing the good understanding of how the European Union is functioning today. And for me, the main task is to keep the things together, to guarantee peace, security, perspectives to decent life, and possibilities to improve life for citizens in the European Union, and to also give you so your generation, the chance I had, yeah, to develop the European Union and to decide which balance we want to have in between what is nowadays the national state and what is today the supranational level of Brussels. It's not a very technocratic model. It's much more a compromise model in which also the competencies, the social and communicative competencies of single players matter. But you will be the generation to decide on where to go. So whether there will be a true federal European Union or whether this will be ongoingly a cooperation of member states which have their own different models of democracy is not our task to decide now. This has also something to do with the different realities we are living in. So we live all in the European Union in the same time, but in the same time we live also in a bit of different times. So a country like Poland or Hungary, countries like the Baltics, escaping from dictatorship only 20 years ago, have a different society, have different mood in society than Germans. So Germany had the chance to participate in a democratic process of building the European Union in spite of being close to its own dictatorship and Nationalsozialism. But over this period of 60 years of Germany, we saw also many, many different phases of gaining democracy. And I think it's a kind of very, very important learning process that we accept that European Union is made of different components, and among those different components, the different member states respect to different experiences, different situations, and different developments. Being in the same union, under the same roof in the same time is quite important. And I hope that, especially since I know this university and I'm very proud about the development of studies at this university, I hope that your years in Lüneburg will contribute to the deeper understanding of also the challenges in this European process and will help you to deal with the positive chances your generation has earned because the founding fathers were so wise and able to learn from mistakes from the past, and hope that your discussions with your colleagues in your lessons and with your professors will help you to stabilize and to develop European Union further. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot for your very interesting presentation. Yeah, I mean, if you have time for a question. So that's from our biotope here, right next to the central building, Hanni.
It's very good for my...
for your for your help. Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think you really put up a different perspective than I had it before, and that and also a different perspective we're going to have this afternoon, because you focused a lot on the history of the European Union, and like that we have to be aware of like what the European Union already did in the process of European integration, and how important it is to look back and to really be aware what a great miracle, really, the European Union is. So since Rebecca Harms is ready for questions, then I just take, or we can just put it here. You have the chance, we had a microphone, you have the chance to, should we go up that everyone can see it? You have the chance to ask her any questions. Yeah. Okay, I just repeated that everyone can understand it. What exactly is your job in the European Parliament?
So until last year, until December, I was the president of the Green faction in the European Parliament, and I was responsible more or less for everything, all issues. So therefore, I had to deal with the financial crisis, with the crisis with Russia. I went to Turkey when first people were put in prison, etc. So I really had to do everything. Meanwhile, I'm not any longer the president, and I'm very much focusing on two different fields. So I'm for my group. I'm the one of the three members in the group responsible for climate strategies. I work in two committees: committee for industry and committee for the protection of the environment. And so right now I'm trying, especially to develop a campaign. Which shows that Paris Agreement was great, but all the practical decisions since Paris Agreement demonstrate that what has been agreed in Paris, we will never be able to make it. So it's, I think, one of those challenges in which you have, on the one hand, to keep the good mood, that we have instruments to tackle global warming. We have technologies to do it better than we did it. We have also financial possibilities to do more in the European Union and outside. And in the same time, so keeping the good mood to show that so far, by active climate measures, we have not achieved as good as nothing. So to bring this together, the insight that it's not sufficient what we did so far, that we can do it and that we have to do it. This is so the field where I try to develop together with colleagues campaigns which are more focusing on convincing people that ecological transition in different fields is not something which they have to fear more than global warming. Because so far, sometimes I think many citizens still believe, that we have to do something against global warming, and they support, in theory, strategies against global warming. But if they have to think about whether to use a car to go in the morning to make their job, so commuting, it's not combined yet. Mm-hmm. And the second issue for me, very important, is I'm working a lot since long on Eastern European states, inside and outside of the European Union. And since January, I'm the chair, together with a colleague from the parliament in Chisinau in Moldova, of a group called Euronest Parliamentary Assembly. We have kind of extra parliamentary assembly in which the European Parliament and the parliaments of Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia are represented, and we try to develop democratic processes and reforms. We try to support those processes via the organized exchange in between those parliaments. And I'm traveling right now a lot, especially in Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova, and soon I'm going to Baku to work especially on political prisoners in Azerbaijan.
Thank you. Further question? Yes.
What would you change? If there's one thing you could change about the European Union, what would you change? Like, would you increase its power over national governments or make compulsory votes, or what would you change?
So I was always a fan of pushing for more possibilities for majority votes.
Okay. Yeah.
And the reason, the recent experience we made with one very challenging majority vote is about the refugee relocation and receiving process in the European Union. It was decided in autumn 2015 by the Ministers for Foreign Affairs in a majority vote, and it never delivered. So this is a kind of lesson I'm trying to learn. And so in this process of how to deal with the refugee challenge, I got doubts on whether majority voting is a good instrument for the European Union as it stands today. So meanwhile, I would say negotiated solutions in which 28 or then 27 member states agree are probably the better fundament, or you take a group of EU states deciding to move ahead as a group of countries. So this is also kind of part of the idea of different speeds in the European Union. But I think this is better than in very, very difficult issues to decide by majority.
So you think it doesn't...
But let me add something, because this is it's an often asked question, and I would like to make clear that I see many problems in the daily life of the European Union, but much more than these problems, I think we should see the overall benefits of the European Union. The European Union, as such, has always been a compromise. There would not be a European Union without the ability of compromise. And so therefore, I would always be ready to defend the European Union even in its shape today. I would not say 1, 2, 3 priorities. If this is not happening, it's over for me with the European Union. It was a compromise, it is a compromise, and even if we are developing more federalism, it will always be a compromise. And compromise, so you cannot learn better than in the European Union that compromise is so maybe it's at the heart of democracy.
So you would say that maintaining the achievements is more important than developing other visions also for the European Union that favored more integration, like Macron also said in his speeches, for example. I asked myself, is the focus more on maintaining achievements, or should the focus also nowadays be more on the development ahead, because there have been many problems, like you said also?
So my feeling in these last years is that if you are not able to recognize the achievements, then you will not be able to go through the different and difficult compromise negotiations which are necessary to keep the things together. So there is for me very, very clear connection in between a recognition of the achievements and ability to go through the daily political struggle in Europe.
Okay, further questions? Over there, do we have a microphone over there? With the scarf? Here, could you just stand up that he can see you?
Would you say that there is a lack of democracy in... Oh,
okay, we should organize it from here, yeah? So he's first and then you're second, okay?
Well, would you say that there is a lack of democracy in the EU due to the fact that the EU Commission is the only party that is allowed to have a legislative initiative?
This is one of the problems described for the European Union again and again. And yes, it's not perfect what we have as a situation, but the European Union is not so a centralized technocratic construction in which the European Commission stands alone. So in the European Commission, no decision is possible against the will of democratically elected heads of states and governments, and in certain issues also parliaments in the member states. And if people are criticizing the deficits of democracy in the institutions in Brussels, they always forget that the Council, the European Council, has a huge legitimacy because they are all elected people, and they are elected in national elections which normally have a much higher turnout than, for example, the elections to the European Parliament, in which I'm elected. So it's a tricky issue, and so it's difficult to judge the democratic deficits of the European Union. But I have the impression that too many people are now in the trap of people like Mr. Gauland in Germany, Marine Le Pen or Mélenchon in France, and other nationalists who always say Europe is an undemocratic, non-democratic, supranational, technocratic institution, and it's kind of super state without control. It's not. We have our institutions, they have each their own legitimacy, and we have to understand this, and then we have to decide together how to develop, but to say it's non-democratic is nonsense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we are running out of time. One final question, but really a short one, with the one who had this. Yeah, you have already the microphone.
Yes, my question is, there's a big topic of lobbyism in the
Lobbyism.
EU. Have you got experience on that, or like, for example, with the PwC company that is also supporting the business department of the Leuphana?
Nobody has no experience working in the European Parliament with lobbies and lobbyists, but also it's not always that awful as it feels if you say lobby or lobbyists. I had a huge pleasure, for example, when the tobacco directive was made. Somebody leaked a list of the huge and very powerful and rich tobacco lobby in Brussels. They had built up a huge lobby institutionalized lobby to advocate against tobacco guidelines directive. And in this list, there were 2 members which were marked as lost cases for the lobbies, and one name was my name. So none of the lobbyists tried to approach me. And it's interesting because my husband is a smoker. So, so there are some contradictions in life, but I have decided when I came to the European Parliament to decide on my own my relations to so-called lobbyists. When I'm working, for example, on CO2 directive for passenger cars, yeah, I need to meet people representing Volkswagen or Peugeot or Fiat. And I say, okay, I need one company which stands more for the big passenger cars, one for the smaller ones, and I will listen to their positions on my ideas on how to regulate CO2 emissions from passenger cars. But I'm also meeting representatives of Greenpeace or representatives of World Health Organizations or climate organizations, and so I'm trying to behave responsible and to not regulate so in favor of climate, but against social interests. So I meet trade unions, for example, very often when we make regulations for industries, big industries in Europe, and I think this is part of our duties. I started to make transparent what I'm doing always when I have responsibilities for a certain lawmaking process. Then I'm publishing on my home page whom I'm going to meet. But what I'm not going to do is what some of the transparency lobbyists are asking. I'm not ready to publish all my appointments and all my communications on my homepage. I think this is going too far, but I'm going to do this always if I am responsible for a certain lawmaking process.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your presentation and also for answering questions. We are really happy that you talked about the history, but also foreign affairs of the European Union, and that we also got insight in how parliamentarians of the European Union are tackling these issues. And thank you so much. It will be really helpful for the further discussion.
Yeah, and good luck not only in the first week.
Thank you.